Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Trans Stupid, where I look over some of the news that's been going on in the LGBTQIA++ community, because stupidity is intersectional. Now, there's a little bit of a running theme with some of the stories that I'm going to be covering this week, and a lot of them involve young children, to be honest. There's different variants in how insane some of this goes. So the first story is reported in the Daily Mail as 3-year-old changes gender from boy to girl after being sent to live with foster parents whose own son had just transitioned to become a female aged 7. The younger child was taken to school dressed as a girl, despite teachers expressly asking the foster couple to put him in boys' clothing. The parents at the centre of the case, which came to light in a court judgment released last week, also had a third child in their care who had gender identity issues. The couple, known only as CP and TP, were investigated by Lancashire County Council Social Services amidst accusations they had manipulated their children's gender and risked causing them significant emotional harm. But last Friday, the couple were exonerated by a High Court judge who praised them as good parents and attuned and careful. Mr. Justice Williams said the evidence from almost all sources of how the children are prospering in the care of CP and TP provides very powerful support to the contention that CP and TP are good parents. Last July, Lancashire Council began proceedings to remove all 5 children from the couple over concerns they had acted in a precipitate manner in relation to perceived gender dysphoria. However, the council withdrew its attempts for reasons that remain unclear. And last Friday, Mr. Justice Williams permitted the council to abandon the litigation it had initiated. He said the lives of the family should now proceed on the basis that those concerns were comprehensively dispelled as a result of the inquisitorial process that had been undertaken. Now, being able to comment on something like this is quite difficult considering we don't have all the facts or the knowledge of what exactly the family situation is like. And the judge was indeed satisfied that everything seemed perfectly normal. But there is one thing in here that actually jumps out at me, and this is the mention that these parents have 3 children in their care who have gender identity issues. Now, one child is one thing. It's gender dysphoria is a rare condition and it's not going to appear everywhere. However, I do believe that there are going to be trans children out there who deal with gender dysphoria. I myself used to be like that. 2 is where you're starting to get a little bit of a push. Again, it's a very rare condition. You're not gonna come across that many trannies, let's be honest. But 3 is where I'm starting to get a little bit more alert about what's happening. They could indeed all have gender dysphoria. But what we know from the way the trans community works nowadays with groups such as Mermaids is that anything and anyone can be trans. And maybe what the judge has said is just following on from the advice of groups like Mermaids. I have no problem with a child, at least socially, transitioning, provided there is the adequate care for them to do so. This should not be a thing where you're tearing down barriers when a young person is involved. You've got to get them as much help as they possibly can get. Growing up is difficult enough as it is without changing your gender at the same time. And I am concerned that a lot of kids nowadays are transitioning without that kind of support when you can just self-identify into it. It's one thing if you're a fully consenting adult, but it's totally another thing if you're 5 years old, or in this case, as young as 3. Hopefully, they are being looked after properly. If they do indeed have gender dysphoria, they are getting the assistance that they need. And they are not just getting bogus self-ID advice that the community is pushing nowadays. Now, the teachers in that story apparently did raise a lot of concerns, in particular with the young boy, in particular with the 3-year-old, who they said should come to school in boys' clothes only to turn up in girls' clothes at the start of the school year. So let's have a look at a story where it's actually the reverse which is happening. Rather than the parents looking like they're the ones that are pushing it on the child, it's the teacher. He feels confused. Parents sue after teacher repeatedly asked 8-year-old if he was trans. A couple in Woodburn, Oregon is suing their school district after they discovered their 8-year-old son was asked repeatedly by his teacher if he was transgender. The parents, who are keeping their identity private, are suing the district for nearly $1 million because they say their son's second grade teacher held him back from recess on multiple occasions to personally ask him if he believed he was really a girl. They said the teacher also gave their son reading materials, videos, and other resources explaining what it means to be transgender. The mother found out about the one-on-one conversations when she found the books her teacher had given her son in his backpack. He feels different now. He feels confused. To hear your son say that on a couch talking to a therapist, holding back tears, it's very heartbreaking, the mother said, according to Fox 12. The parents say their child had a stomach problem which made him uncomfortable with using the restroom. They suspect his hesitation about going to the bathroom made his teacher believe he could have gender dysphoria. They say their child suffered significant emotional confusion by being singled out by his teacher. He is on anxiety medication and regularly sees a therapist. I don't blame him at all. It should not really be the place of an adult to tell a child if they have gender dysphoria, because you're putting the idea in their head. When I was growing up, I knew the way in which I was. I didn't talk about it with a lot of people because I didn't think I would get the help, and in the 90s I probably wouldn't have. You should not be presuming that a kid is trans because they are very impressionable. Now, in the story beforehand, we don't really know too much about the full details of what's happening, and it's a similar case with this one as well. However, I would certainly trust the parents a lot more than a teacher in knowing their children. And in this instance, this seems to be someone who's pushing the modern trans activist agenda, as woke and progressive as it is, just in order to get some points. And the school even commented saying that whilst they acknowledge the teacher's actions, they still work at the school. So it's perfectly fine for someone to tell an impressionable young child that they might be trans. Let them figure it out. It is difficult, and make sure that the care is there if indeed they are trans. But gonna guess that a lot of these kids are not going to be trans at all. You're pushing them into it. This is dangerous. This is going to cause harm. And the more you do this, the more you're going to end up leaving actual genuine cases of children with gender dysphoria out, because they will assume that they are just making it up as well. You will be neglecting them, but it's all worth it to get those woke progressive points, isn't it? And if you want more examples of how weird this world is getting when it comes to LGBT youth, look no further than Desmond Is Amazing. Now, Desmond, for people who don't know, is a 11-year-old boy who is also a drag queen, and this is becoming more of a common trend as parents are thrusting their young boys into the spotlight as drag queens in order to gain more progressive points. Now, Desmond has been pretty controversial, and his parents certainly have been as well. But, you know, current year, everything needs to be celebrated, and Converse agrees with that as well. However, 11-year-old drag queen gets threats after Converse collaboration. Critics are trying to report the young drag queen to Child Protective Services. Converse announced on Tuesday, the 7th of May, its partnership with 11-year-old drag queen Desmond Is Amazing. But after the announcement, conservative commentators began calling for a boycott of Converse. According to Desmond's mother, Wendy Lou, some commentators have even gone as far as urging each other to call Child Protective Services on her family. The conservative media is up in arms about Desmond being featured in Converse's new Pride campaign, she told Gay Star News. They are suggesting that Converse promotes paedophilia by showcasing a drag kid who stripped in a sleazy gay bar whilst adult males showered him with money. What a strange thing to say as his mum, because that is exactly what happened a couple of months ago. She's highlighting it as though, how dare these people get outraged? If you want a prime example of clown world, that statement is 100% prime clown world. Of course people are going to be outraged about that. An 11-year-old dancing provocatively in a sleazy bar whilst grown adult men throw money at him. How is this acceptable? Wendy Lou revealed CPS has already received several reports since the campaign debuted. The Conservatives are calling in child abuse and child exploitation as the complaints to CPS, she revealed. Again, abusing CPS resources. Again, trying to use CPS as a weapon against our family. Wendy Liu then revealed CPS investigated a family between December last year and March this year. The reports found no abuse or maltreatment. She then continued, they say Converse is trying to be a woke brand. This is an attack on all LGBTQ and gender non-conforming youth who are trying to express themselves. But you are thrusting this young man into the spotlight and doing very questionable things. I think it's reasonable for people to be questioning what is going on. I find it very strange when you have children like Desmond Is Amazing and another one who calls himself Lactatia. They're being put front and centre. If they want to dress up as like drag queens, then one thing if they're just playing make-believe, but a lot of them are wearing quite provocative clothes and they're kids wearing provocative clothes. It's like those beauty pageants where you have young girls wearing provocative clothes. Kids should not be dressed in that way. That's weird. How are you okay with this as his mother? Back in January, an article came out that accused her of exploiting her son and forcing him to perform in gay bars. She shot back, "This is nothing more than blatant homophobia and a display of the grossly outdated belief that gay men are paedophiles." No, this isn't an attack on gay men. A adult throwing money at a young boy who is dancing provocatively, regardless of the sexuality of that man, that is a very weird thing to do. How do you explain that to people? Wendy Liu then continued, "The truth is, Desmond is a professional drag performer. He's like 11, he shouldn't really be a professional drag performer at his age." I can understand that kids want to dress up, but drag in itself has always been quite adult. I mean, you just need to watch anything, whether it's like RuPaul's Drag Race, and you get quite a good idea of what the scene is like. Are you sure that's what you really want to be putting a young boy into? That's not a slight against like the drag world. I actually quite enjoy seeing drag queens, and I think some of them are absolutely great. But is this really appropriate for an 11-year-old boy? I don't think it is. And this is a problem that you get with a lot of pride events where you end up having people acting in a very adult way, but they're just being brushed off as, well, it's fine because, you know, you've got to be inclusive. You're being homophobic if you're critical of it. But a lot of this is throwing sexuality in there, and a lot of this drag performance is like that. But moving on from 11-year-olds to people who generally act like 11-year-olds, and it's time to return to one of my favourite topics. Of course, that's the NUS and their amazing trans campaign. Now, just as a quick refresher, the NUS trans campaign last year elected officer Jess Bradley to lead them to victory. And a few months after being re-elected, Bradley got suspended on the very suspicious and very serious sexual allegations. And since then, they did nothing. And they almost got defunded. But they campaigned to make sure that they have a voice, because what they do is so important, despite the fact that they did absolutely nothing over the last year. So we're coming to a genuine end this time for the Bradley saga, as they are now electing a new trans officer, and they have announced the person who is running for it. So Bradley is not going to be in that position much longer. Bradley has had, I'm sure, a very relaxing 9 months, almost coming up to 10 months now, by the way, of being suspended and just sitting around doing nothing and being paid for it. You know, that can't last forever, unfortunately, and the show must go on. So who is it who is going to be replacing Bradley? See, they're having an election, but predictably, only one person is running for it. And that person is Eden Ladley, a friend of Jess Bradley, who had previously been involved in the trans campaign before then leading the NUS's LGBT plus campaign. So it seems like a little bit of job hopping between Bradders and friends. It's interesting that Ladders, whose pronouns are Z, is the only person running for it and was quite instrumental in bringing this campaign back. Probably just because Z knew that Z was going to get paid for it. I'm not going to use Z anymore, it's fucking stupid. But yeah, nobody else is running for it. So Ladders is going to be replacing Bradders. And what's going to happen under Ladders? Well, it's mostly the same kind of stuff that Bradley did. Ladders wants to drive a nationwide lobby for increased funding for transition-related healthcare, which I agree with. There should indeed be more funding for it, because the system's getting overloaded. Emphasising the need to implement the decentralisation of services and a removal of medical gatekeeping, especially for young people and disabled people. You mean the most vulnerable people out there? You want to remove any kind of protection for them, because you use gatekeeping as though it's like a bad word, but that's kind of what it is. It's making sure that vulnerable people are going to be as protected as they can be, and you want it to be a free-for-all for young people. Ladders also wants to develop and launch the NUS's first dedicated survey of trans students' experiences, with a focus on healthcare. So that's just going to be a self-selective survey, isn't it? And we all know what the trans community think of the world. They think that we live in hell. When you instill in people that life is hard, of course they are going to think that life is hard, and of course they're going to write that in. I can predict the results for you right now. Everyone is oppressed. Everyone has a really hard time. You don't need to waste the money on it because you know the bloody answer. Trans people know more than most that the state does not have our best interests at heart. The state doesn't really have anyone's best interests at heart, let's be honest. From the prison industrial complex to supporting the genocide of gender variant people through colonization. What? Supporting genocide? Provide evidence, please. That is an extreme statement to make. We must stand with trans people globally and recognise the violence the state is doing to the most marginalised communities of trans people in the UK and worldwide. What violence is the state doing to trans people in the UK? I'm not seeing police officers bashing down our doors. In fact, I'm seeing police officers bash down the doors of people who are critical of the trans movement. That doesn't say to me that the state is supporting genocide against us. But predictably, Ladders wants to put the NUS trans campaign at the heart of the struggle for prison abolition. This has nothing to do with being trans. I've discussed this in videos in the past. This is just carrying on Bradley's work. Prisons are inhumane, deliver no real justice, and kill trans people, LGBT people, disabled people, people of colour, and women. What about men? What about the group that is killed in prison more than any others? Do you not care about them? And of course prisons deliver no real justice. No, instead it's the community that delivers the real justice, isn't it? Isn't it, Ladders? When you have serious allegations into, it's restorative justice. You are always being seen as, as making sure that people are being brought to justice without the state getting involved and not brushing things under the carpet because it's your mate. The fact, like, all these various restorative justice organisations, all of them make sure that they investigate things thoroughly and don't make excuses as to why they aren't actually doing anything. But it's the prisons that are wrong, isn't it? It's the prisons that are wrong. Gee, I wonder why. I wonder why your group hates prisons so much. I wonder why. And finally, Ladders wants to run a campaign to raise awareness of and materially support trans people in Brazil, who are a special risk of murder as a result of racist, trans misogynistic and whorephobic violence. It's true that Brazil is indeed the capital of the world when it comes to trans people being murdered, as particular trans women, in particular trans women who are sex workers. But you guys can't exactly stop someone from whipping their dick out at work. How are you going to stop these people in some of the most dangerous places on earth from being murdered? What the hell are you going to offer them? This is completely outside of your control, outside of your remit. Try and look after the home. Make sure that people who are accused of very serious things are brought to justice. That's something you can actually control, Ladley. That's something you can control, not what's happening in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro. But if there's any trans students who are watching this, which I somehow doubt because I probably would have triggered a lot of you already, but for those of you who are actually a little bit red-pilled, what do you think of this? Do you really want to be represented by people like Ladders? The last thing I want to talk about in this video involves a common theme around current year, and this is removal from social media. We're seeing a lot of the big tech giants clamping down on what they consider to be problematic speech and removing people from platforms that they just don't agree with. The bannings of people like Milo Yiannopoulos and Paul Joseph Watson has received a lot of praise out there, but eventually views that you agree with are going to start getting shut down as well, and nobody is protected from it. Do you want a good example of this? Well, how about Ray Blanchard, who found himself blocked on Twitter for expressing clinical opinion on transgenderism. In the early hours of Sunday morning, an expert PhD psychologist who helped write the official psychological position on transgender identity was blocked on Twitter for expressing his opinion informed by clinical experience. His well-reasoned position was flagged for hateful conduct. On Saturday, Ray Blanchard, a PhD psychologist and adjunct professor at the University of Toronto, who served on the working group for gender dysphoria for the DSMV, the gold standard of definitions helping psychologists diagnose disorders for patients, tweeted out his clinically informed opinion on trans identity. He still affirmed the controversial idea that sex change surgery is the best treatment for carefully screened adult patients whose gender dysphoria has proven resistant to other forms of treatment. I would disagree that that's particularly controversial, to be honest. As someone with gender dysphoria, it certainly helped me. But let's go into exactly what it is that he said that was wrong. Blanchard actually posted a whole thread detailing what his actual beliefs in transsexualism and gender identity disorders are. In particular, one tweet was flagged up for violating Twitter rules, saying, "My beliefs include the following 6 elements. Transsexualism and mild forms of gender dysphoria are types of mental disorder which may leave the individual with average or even above average functioning in unrelated areas of life." Now, many people spoke out against the suspension of Ray Blanchard, and he was eventually brought back, and apparently it was just a mistake. But this is going to happen again. This will probably happen again to Ray Blanchard, and this is going to happen to more and more people, because there are particular views that the big tech companies in Silicon Valley don't want you to be having. And it's especially interesting that this is on trans issues, and someone who has studied this for almost their entire professional life. Now, Blanchard's views can be considered controversial with some people in the trans community, but regardless of your opinions on whether you think that his views on this are accurate to you or not, he has still researched his positions, and he has been doing that for a very long time. He hasn't come at this point out of nowhere. He's researched, and despite researching, a faceless individual can still say, "Nope, you're wrong. You gone." If people who have spent their entire lives looking into this kind of thing aren't allowed to express what the fruits of their labour are, then what hope is there for any of us? We're going to see more and more people being removed from social media for stating the wrong opinions. And one of the reasons why I talk about trans issues a lot when it comes to free speech is it's a perfect example of how one particular group, and quite an extreme part of that group, can run away with the narrative and everyone has to follow along. It isn't going to be the be-all and end-all. Free speech doesn't stop at just criticising trans issues, after all. If you are not pro-free speech for anyone except for your views, then you're not really for pro-free speech. I'd like to do a bit of a speech on how I would love the big tech companies to allow us to actually talk about trans issues in the way in which we want to, but that's simply not going to happen. We're quite a long way away from having any kind of freedom on this, and when you have platforms like Gab as actual open alternatives, they just get slandered in the media as being far right. Well, at least Gab let you talk. Gab's not a far right site, but it lets you talk about whatever you want, so long as you're not breaking the law. And that's really what likes of Twitter and Facebook should be as well. The longer we stay on these platforms, the longer we allow them to curate our speech. But what are your thoughts on the stories that I've covered this week? Is there anything in particular I've missed out? There's a lot that is going on, and so I don't always cover everything. But please let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. And a special thank you to Sarah, Kim, Codex and the rest of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.